So for this learning objective 4, we're going to look at the election of 1824 and show how it led to the development of the Democratic Party. So here we have running John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, the second president of the United States. And he's representing basically the North. He's got most support in the North. We got Andrew Jackson, 1824 election, most prominent support coming from the West. Williams H. Crawford, a lot of his support is coming from the South. And we have Henry Clay, who's going to claim he is the true American national candidate, even though he loses this election. He comes in last place. And so let's take a look at the results here. So here are the results. Andrew Jackson, 99 electoral votes. Adams, 84. Crawford, 41. And Clay comes in dead last, being the American candidate at 37. So obviously in 1824, Andrew Jackson wins the presidency. Wrong, right? That would be wrong. Right. The reason why he's not going to win this presidency is he needed 131 electoral votes to be the clear winner of this. And so since we have so many prominent candidates in this race, they diluted the vote here. And so in the Constitution, when a election is in dispute in this manner, meaning there's no clear winner, it goes to the House of Representatives. The issue with it going to the House of Representatives here, why it is somewhat of a why it's somewhat awkward, is that the Speaker of the House of Representatives, is one of the candidates. It is Henry Clay, right? So Henry Clay is going to be able to decide this election. He's obviously not going to lobby to make sure he becomes president. He's not going to use his leadership skills to have the representatives vote for him, in other words. But he's definitely not going to have Andrew Jackson become president. He doesn't like Andrew Jackson. He just sees him as basically a thug, military leader from poor stock in this case. So he does not want him to become president. So he's going to lobby the representatives to elect John Quincy Adams, this guy right here. So John Quincy Adams is going to become the 6th president of the United States, and Jackson obviously is going to be pretty perturbed about this. And what's going to further strengthen Jackson's anger is the Secretary of State is going to become this guy right here. Henry Clay, right? The former, now who would become the former Speaker of the House, the one who basically decided this election. And so Jackson is going to call this the corrupt bargain. And in 1826, he is going to resign from Congress, and he's going to establish the modern-day Democratic Party. The other thing we have to understand, too, about the tensions that erupt between Clay and Jackson is to understand Henry Clay's American system. So, again, Jackson finds the Democratic Party in 1826. He's going to use this new political party that he creates to create to win him the presidency in 1828. Now, what's going to happen as a result of Jackson's presidency and the Democratic Party is it's going to give rise to a new party in 1832 called the Whig Party. So to understand exactly why why these tensions were viewed to be so serious between Clay and Jackson. Again, let's take a look at his American system. So you've got there's three legs to the American system, according to Clay. One is the national bank, right? So the first national bank expired in 1811, and in 1816, Madison is going to establish the second bank of the United States. He's going to do this because, again, as we looked at the last learning objective, he's a pragmatist. What happens as a result of the bank closing in 1811 is you have numerous banks basically fill the vacuum of the first bank, and they issue their own currency. And basically what happens is the market gets flooded with currency. And so in 1811, there was about $28 million in banknotes floating around in the American currency issued from private banks. By 1816, there's $68 million floating around. So the value of money is coming down and inflation is going up because it takes more dollars to get products. And so Madison, even though he has made a lifelong career of hating a national bank, is going to understand the practicality of having one. So he's going to change his mind. And so in 1816, we get the second bank of the United States. The other leg of the American system is a protective tariff, right? And so the tariff of 1816 is imposed in the American economy to basically keep out British goods. So with the conclusion of the War of 1812 and the normalization of relations between Great Britain and the United States, in an effort to gain back its market share in the American economy, Great Britain floods the American economy with cheap British goods. To stop that from happening, this tariff was imposed on British goods to protect American businesses. The next leg of the American system is the infrastructure. So in 1817, John C. Calhoun proposes the bonus bill, and it's vetoed by Madison. Basically, what this was going to do was going to provide $1.5 million to all of the states to come up with various infrastructure projects, roads, canals, whatever the case is. And so Clay would argue the federal government needs to take the leadership on this because we need to make sure that American products are able to get to the places they need as efficiently as possible. Now, this part's going to fail, but this is something that Clay is going to work towards throughout his political career. Now, Jackson is going to defeat the bank, and Jackson is going to defeat the tariff during his presidency. And this is going to make Clay and Jackson political enemies. We'll talk a little bit more about this in detail in the next learning objective. But let me show you a little video regarding the American system to kind of give it more of a some emphasis here. And let me just show you this little clip from a documentary on Andrew Jackson talking about the election of 1824. It gives a little bit more detail about the election and how Jackson was cheated out of it, and then how he's eventually going to win the 1828 election through the grassroots campaigning.
In 1824, James Monroe was retiring after 2 terms as president. Andrew Jackson thought he was an excellent candidate to be the next occupant of the White House, but he was not the only one with his eye on the job. John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, America's 2nd president. He had spent much of his childhood in Europe with his father and was now Secretary of State. His worldview was as different from Jackson's as his upbringing.
He was a politician with imagination. He imagined an America that was much more economically developed. He imagined an America with much broader educational opportunities for everybody. He imagined an America in which the rights of Indians and black people and women were actually respected.
Treasury Secretary William Crawford and Speaker of the House Henry Clay were also candidates for president. As in every previous election, the candidates did not campaign, and in some states, residents did not even get to vote for president. Instead, the state legislature chose that state's members of the Electoral College.
In the early years of the Republic, voters were not called on to choose the President of the United States. Choosing the President was, quite honestly and quite deliberately, an elitist operation. The people who were thought to be the insiders in state government became the presidential electors, and they chose the President based on which set of Washington insiders they thought was the best. And the people were basically expected to accept that decision without complaint.
In an election controlled by Washington politicians, the frontiersman from Tennessee seemed certain to finish last.
When Andrew Jackson's name was first floated about as a candidate for the presidency, all kinds of leading politicians were aghast. They understood him to be a wild-eyed military chieftain, a hot-tempered individual who had executed a couple of Brits down in Florida without authority or apparent reason. And as Jefferson said, he was the most unfit man imaginable for the office of the presidency.
To counter the view that Jackson was unfit to be president, one of his advisors, John Eaton, published a series of letters that proposed an entirely new rationale for what was important in a president.
In the selection of a chief magistrate of this union, it is not necessary that we should look exclusively to the mental qualifications of a candidate. It is strength of character, a perseverance and steadiness of purpose that makes the distinguished man.
What John Eaton does in the Letters of Wyoming is simply stand on its head the conventional understanding of the qualifications of a president. The very qualities that made a candidate before, John Quincy Adams being the ideal: experience in courts of Europe, experience in diplomacy, experience as his father's secretary in various offices of government. All of this is proof of corruption, proof of insider status, proof of being out of touch with the people. Whereas Jackson's complete absence of a resume becomes his primary qualification for office.
When the votes were counted in 1824, The Washington establishment was stunned to discover that Andrew Jackson had won both the most popular and electoral votes. But with 4 men dividing up the electoral vote, Jackson did not win a majority, and the election was thrown into the House of Representatives. Speaker of the House Henry Clay had finished last and was out of the running. But he had enough support to play kingmaker. Clay believed with all of his heart that Andrew Jackson was unfit to be president, so he threw his support to John Quincy Adams, and with it, Adams was elected president. Adams then immediately offered Clay the job of Secretary of State. Outraged Jackson supporters began railing against what they were convinced was a corrupt bargain between Washington insiders to steal the presidency from Andrew Jackson. One newspaper, which had endorsed Jackson, declared,
"Expired at Washington on the 9th of February, 1825, the virtue, liberty, and independence of the United States, caused by poison administered by the assassin hand of John Quincy Adams, the usurper, and Henry Clay."
What they were absolutely convinced of was that the popular will had been thwarted, the election had been stolen, Washington insiders had cooked up the whole thing, and they had to make sure it didn't happen again.
By 1828, when Andrew Jackson ran against John Quincy Adams a second time, the Jacksonians were ready to launch the first true political campaign in American history. Their strategy was driven by the fact that most states had finally given the vote to all white males. To inspire those men to get out and vote for the first time in their lives, Jackson's campaign took advantage of the latest media revolution, lithography, to flood America with lithographs of the hero of the Battle of New Orleans.
If you're going to elect the president by appealing to the people as a whole, you change the ground rules completely, because you have to win the popular vote down there at the grassroots, at the militia grounds, in the taverns, in the fairs, in the streets, all across the country. So somehow you have to be able to reach those people. You've got to fire them up.
The Jacksonians' plan was to rally average Americans around a new idea, that they should choose the President of the United States.
So they organized all kinds of popular demonstrations, rallies, conventions, assemblies of people who would get together and hurrah for Jackson. They would pass some set of resolutions, and then they would all have a barbecue, and they would all have a drink, and they would start to cheer, and pretty soon you get the sense that everybody in this precinct is for Jackson, and they'd send the results of that to the newspaper and try to publicize it as much as they could. And this was the kind of tactic that didn't require finagling behind closed doors. It could take place in the boondocks. It could happen in rural Tennessee, rural Alabama, rural New York. And this kind of stirring up popular vote and giving the people the notion that they should choose the president and not the caucus members in Washington, that revolutionized American politics. The people have not been willing to give up the choice of president ever since.
The revolutionary new style of campaigning soon made Jackson into the heavy favorite. But then his opponents